is about how we are shaped by our conditions. So you put yourself into different conditions, you're going to experience something different. You're going to find yourself in a new way, or you're going to find a new self. Sometimes you see people say authenticity is finding your true self.
Okay.
Well, you can say that, and it's not wrong, but it sort of implies that there is this thing called your true self, which is a kind of unchanging entity that you're going to discover, like the nugget of gold.
Yeah. That's
not really true. Life isn't like that. Life's endlessly unfolding, you see. The authentic person is constantly experiencing something new, finds newness in even familiar situations, is experimenting with life, is putting themselves into new situations, discovering. There's a kind of common idea that the Buddha, once he was enlightened, he'd now got it, he'd got his pot of gold, and nothing ever changed after that. I think this is a misconception.
Okay.
The fact that he was illuminated meant that he would have gone on learning. You know, and you can see some signs of it. You can see, for instance, in the life of the Sangha of the Buddha, they have the Vinaya. And the Vinaya is the rules, if you like, the guidances.
For the monks, yes.
For the monks, how you live your life. Well, some of these change over the period of the Buddha's lifetime. We can see and attach them little stories about how these changes occur. So people come to the Buddha and they say, well, such and such happened, what should we do with that? And the Buddha makes some sort of ruling or other and says, well, it would be wise to do so and so. But then later something else happens, and they come to the Buddha and they say, well, we've been doing so and so, but then such and such happened. And he says, oh yes, okay. Well, we'll change that rule a bit.
He would have said, don't bother me with this.
We'll do something else, you see. So you can see that there's a constant spirit of love, compassion, generosity, wisdom, and so on running through. But in terms of the practical detail, the Buddha changes things from time to time. So evidently he is learning, you see. It's not like he's got a stock from heaven that he's just dispensing.
No.
You see? What he's dispensing is that spirit of love, compassion, wisdom, and so on, peace, equanimity. But the actual form it takes depends on circumstance, depends on conditions. So if you're in that situation, you're learning all the time, and the more illuminated you are spiritually, the more you're learning. You know, you learn how to learn.
But you learn also from mistakes.
And so in a sense, a Buddha makes more mistakes than anybody else. because he's experimenting, you see. I really like the fact that what we know from the tradition, the very first thought that came to the Buddha after he was enlightened was, nobody will understand this, there's no point in teaching. And he was wrong, you see.
Mistake number one.
So that's right. So the first thought the enlightened Buddha had after his enlightenment was a mistake. And it goes on like this, you see. But that it was a mistake, but it wasn't a disaster, because he learned. You see.
Do you think he was wrong sometimes? Because you see a lot of, in the Pali Canon, somebody comes to the Buddha, asks a question, then he comes up with a discourse or a talk. Did he make mistakes there, or did they erase it?
It's very interesting, you know, because in most of these dialogues, you hear that the questioner goes away very satisfied, and some big change happens in their life, and it's been a success, you see. But sometimes not. Sometimes the person goes away very fed up with his discussion with the Buddha, and he doesn't agree, and da-da-da-da. And so I do wonder sometimes, it never says in the text, but you do wonder, did the Buddha sometimes think, I should have said, You know?
Exactly.
But I wouldn't be surprised.
No, because some of the questions were difficult questions or
Yes,
difficult
of course,
matters,
of
and then he
course.
just whaps.
And he's human, you see.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a kind of example of an authentic human being living an authentic life.
Yeah, yeah. So what would be, in your view, the definition of an authentic life?
Oh, well, almost by definition you can't define it. But
Give it a try.
But I suppose the simple definition you would say is something about not pretending, not posing.
Yeah.
You know, it's about being natural, being what you are, and three different people, that means they're not going to be the same because they're three different people. So what's authentic for this one is not what's authentic for that one. So, yes, I think that's fairly basic. So then you go into, well, why? Why do we pretend? Why don't we just be natural like that? And the answer to that, I suppose, basically is greed, hate, and delusion, which often means fear. And often that's social fear. Yep. The fear of humiliation, the fear of embarrassment, fear of being seen in a certain way that we don't want to be seen as. Yep. And so we construct an ego, a persona. You know, the Greek the word personality comes from the Greek for a mask, the persona. So we invent a mask that we put on. We know will please some people, and we're all the time trying to perfect it in the hope that it'll please everybody. But this is artificial, you see.
Yeah.
And we were talking about solitude just now. Tends to drop away when you're in solitude because you're not getting the reinforcement all the time. You're not getting the demand that you present yourself in such and such a way. The beetle on the branch doesn't mind.
But you can, for instance, there was one story I read, patience, for instance, you can practice with real people, say in a community, because you get impatient, but then when you're in the forest you cannot be impatient because there's nobody to...
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So you miss also some teaching.
Oh yeah, yes, of course. I mean, I suppose in a certain sense, you could say the aim is to be as natural as you might be in the forest when you're not in the forest.
When you go back.
When you go back. That's right. This is true generally in Buddhist practice. You sit on your meditation cushion and you do your practice, but the test is not really what happens when you're on that cushion. The test is what happens in the tea break.
Correct.
What happens when you're not performing this role, you see. When the props are taken away, what do you see then? That's the test.
So you're saying in solitude or on the cushion you can make connection to an authentic self.
Yes, well, make connection to, yes, and it's not wrong, but you wouldn't, but it doesn't describe the subjective position, because you don't feel you are making connection to yourself. You feel you're engaged with what's around you. An outside observer, we're talking about being in solitude, but let's pretend there's a secret observer behind a tree somewhere with this camera. They might say, oh, that person's in contact with themselves. But they wouldn't frame it that way themselves because they're in the midst of it. You know, they're doing it. They're flowing. They're in the flow. In the flow. So they've let go of that kind of, I am trying to be such and such a person or such and such a presentation, you see.
But like people,
and if you can come back into society where you're constantly being, getting those messages from other people, we want you to be such and such, and okay, you maybe conform to what they need in certain circumstances, but you're not taken in by it. You don't start to believe in it. You know, okay, you perform your social role because that's your duty. But you know it's just a social role, and you could be something else, and you are something else, and like that.
Yep. Yep.
That's freedom, you see.
Freedom.
Freedom doesn't mean that you're never in a fixed position, but you're not deceived by it. It doesn't become a state of delusion. It becomes a state of delusion when you're involved in it through greed, or you're involved in it through hate, which includes fear.